Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. We're excited to have Karen and Larry from Avalara, and they will be presenting on top tax tips and concerns for manufacturers. And as a reminder, we are recording this webinar and we will post it to our on-demand webinar library for you to review again or share with anyone. And if you do have any questions during our presentation, we encourage you to type them into the questions box and we will get them answered during our Q&A time at the end of our session. So now I'm going to pass it on over to Karen to kick off our presentation.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Angie. Well, thanks again for joining us today to discuss a very exciting but necessary topic on sales tax compliance for manufacturers. Today, we'll be walking through how to keep your company in compliance with all the changes in this day and age with sales tax. So just to start, my name is Karen Brudvig. I'm the Alliance Manager with Avalara and work really closely with Innovia. My primary focus is in the Microsoft ecosystem. I've been with Avalara since January, but not new to the ISV world. I worked for a supply chain ISV for about 8 years previous to that, also working in compliance too. I live in DC, but I'm originally from the Midwest. Larry, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Karen. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Larry Sheets. Some of you may know me. I'm our customer-facing representative for Avalara's partnership with Innovia. I've been in that role on Team Microsoft since July of 2019 when I started Avalara. I'm originally from the DC area as well, but living out here in Seattle, where Avalara is headquartered. My previous roles were as a financial advisor with Edward Jones for 3 years. That was immediately after I got out of the military in July of 2016, where I did 8 years in the Coast Guard, and that's about all there is to know about me, other than my wife's downstairs working on Zoom, and we've got a 2-year-old daughter running around. So that's us.
Awesome.
Karen, I'll turn things back over to you.
Thanks. Well, we'll just start off with a quick agenda. So today we're going to start off by talking about just the current state and trends we've seen in manufacturing. Then Laurie's going to walk through how COVID-19 has affected manufacturing, and probably you're going to see a lot of trends that you're seeing in your own business today. Then from there, we'll dive into 2021 tax obligations, especially for those new sales channels as they come with new tax complexities. And then finally, we'll open up for Q&A. But as Angie mentioned as well, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please put them in the chat and then we'll get those answered for you. So before I hand it off to Larry here, I'm just going to recap what we've seen this past year. So you can read through these stats, but there's definitely, as you can see, there's definitely been a large increase in manufacturing in 2020. Despite people thinking that spending is down, there's actually been a huge jump in sales. You may have seen this trend in your own business as well. Demand is really growing, and unfortunately that means potentially more tax compliance with that. And we've seen industries expand and getting really creative over the past year with new products and offerings. Businesses are constantly changing and evolving and have become more adaptable in the market to service the community needs over the past year. So then this increases the need to stay on top of tax compliance. So next, Larry, we'll just go into how COVID-19 has affected manufacturing.
Great, thanks, Karen. So as we move through these next several slides, as well as the overall presentation, I want to leave you all with a couple things to keep in mind on how Avalara can kind of step into this new compliance landscape, or frankly, the sales and use tax landscape prompted by COVID-19 and the impact to manufacturers and distributors particularly. I want to keep in mind that we're going to help you determine and stay on top of your obligations and requirements. So what that means is, I'm sure some folks have had employees go remote into states where they previously weren't registered. We can help you get registered and work with those new compliance requirements, whether that's calculating or just determining how your products for sale are viewed in these new jurisdictions. The second piece is really the processes that you've either already in place or are working to put in place to address these new requirements and obligations. particularly if we're looking at kind of a leaner workforce to meet these increased standards that are a result of COVID-19. And then arguably the most important piece is with these new obligations and requirements, how are we not only going to maintain your current successful customer experience, but how can we elevate that without spending an inordinate amount of time on compliance? So allow your key resources to do what they do best rather than working on the mundane, but also highly risk-focused areas of sales and use tax compliance. So our goal is to deliver you a higher standard of compliance that allows you and your highly skilled teams to focus on growing the business without sales and use tax being a burden on growth. So get your folks back to work on what they do best without worrying about this stuff, where we can take that risk off your plate, continue to grow in this new evolving landscape. So kind of move forward here. The impact that we've seen predominantly on the manufacturing space is a movement from in-person B2B sales to digital, whether that's through launching of new products, disruption of supply chain. Really, the businesses that we've seen maintain or accelerate their growth through this kind of unprecedented scenario of the last 15 months are those that either had an e-commerce channel, whether that's B2C or B2B or both, or have launched that as a way to, excuse me, continue to grow in the face of the pandemic. So that's created new tax obligations, potentially more work for your already highly overworked staff as it is, as well as the disruption of global supply chains. So trying to do more with less while continuing to keep the lights on. So that's what we've seen as far as the impact goes. Shifts, as we kind of mentioned, launching of new products. A lot of stuff that we've seen is production of hand sanitizer, other PPE related to COVID, in addition to what you're already selling. This creates potential new taxability challenges. So how are these new products viewed in the areas and jurisdictions where you're already selling, as well as you have to go into additional jurisdictions in new states? How are those new products viewed there, as well as your traditional core offerings? So as far as this digital space goes, there are a lot of benefits, but a lot of those benefits are directly tied to the customer experience and the processes you're putting in place to make sure that this transition is as efficient as possible. So it allows you to get directly to your consumers. It allows your wholesalers or other manufacturing customers to purchase in bulk quicker. So we see this e-commerce adoption for the manufacturing and distribution space as something that's here to stay. I know it's taken a lot of companies a lot of time and effort and money to launch these in order to kind of stay in front and keep driving revenue. So we likely see that to continue. And then frankly, after 15 months of most people buying online, whether that's for themselves or for their business, they've transitioned to kind of an expectation of doing this in the digital space. So our solution is to deliver you one that more than meets your tax obligations, but also improves upon the customer buying experience. Most people in this day and age are Amazon Prime members, so they have that expectation for easy to purchase, quick to check out, quick fulfillment. Our solution is designed to kind of build on that expectation without you having to hire additional headcount just for this specific piece. So tax considerations for manufacturers moving forward in 2021 as the world starts to reopen. Oops, jumped ahead here. This is where we're jumping into those kind of three core topics that I mentioned at the very beginning. What are your obligations and where are they? What are those requirements? So the first tie-in here is Nexus. Where should you be registered? So looking beyond your physical footprint, what do your sales look like on a state-by-state basis? Have you triggered new obligations? For the manufacturers especially, which we refer to as highly exempt businesses, where you're not usually collecting tax. The question then becomes, how are you proving that tax should not have been collected on these purchases? That goes right into the exemption certificate management process. So we mentioned process. This is really where we're going to hone in here as we move forward with the presentation, making sure that this historically time-consuming requirement of collecting and then maintaining all the exemptions for your customers is efficient. So making sure you're collecting and validating the correct forms on the front end, but then also providing you a tool to manage them on the back end for your state-by-state renewals, whether that's annual renewals in Florida, the 2 to 3 year renewals for most other places, giving you a tool that you know on a state-by-state basis, exemption by exemption basis, what needs to be renewed, and then giving you a tool that does that quickly and efficiently. Third piece here is taxability. So kind of goes hand in hand with Nexus. How is my product viewed in these new areas of obligation? And then finally, those three beginning pieces, making sure that they do not impact the customer experience. And then more importantly, that we're giving you a solution that elevates that customer experience. So what that means, and we'll get to it here in a moment, for that exemption certificate collection piece, is putting more of an onus on the actual buyer to provide you the exemption certificate either at the point of sale or in the e-commerce shopping cart. So you're not having to deal with that initial purchase that has sales tax on it, and then the customer comes back later that day, later that week, the next month, and says, whoa, 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 here's my exemption certificate, can I get a credit? We can get rid of that time-consuming process, do it all through the shopping cart if you want. So let me stop here with our first poll question. For everybody attending so far, what's been the hardest part of managing sales tax, especially in light of COVID?
If everyone could select from one of the selections there, then we can get that launched. Okay, thank you. Larry, it looks like 100% said sales tax calculations.
Got it. Okay, great. So sales tax calculations, that challenge, especially even for highly exempt businesses who may not be collecting sales tax or used to collecting sales tax, our solution for the calculation standpoint is the only solution in the space that's guaranteed to be accurate 100% of the time. We'll get to the workflow here in a moment, but we look at three things. We look at who's making that purchase. Is this an exempt entity? Meaning, do you have a current valid certificate on file for them? Second is, where is this transaction and purchase actually taking place? Making sure that we're capturing all the correct rates. I'm sure most people are familiar with Google Maps or Apple Maps at this point. Your ability to drop a pin on your phone or on your desktop to that specific location. That's exactly what we're doing for our rate calculation. We're doing it at the rooftop level. So we're seeing latitude and longitude replacing traditional US Postal Service zip code calculation. Reason we did that was over 40% of zip codes in the US have more than one rate, and the obligation to make sure that you're capturing the correct rate falls on the business. So with that element of risk, we remove that completely. And then on the last piece we look at is, what is this person or business purchasing and how is it viewed in that specific latitude and longitude? We do all of that in, on average, 0.4 of a second. So when we talk about customer experience, there's likely minimal, if any, slowdown in your typical checkout process. It runs in the background. Tax is guaranteed accurate every single time on the front end, and we also have the ability to file and remit on your behalf. So we can do that end-to-end process in less than half a second for you. So it's a really great solution, and we'll get to more of what that looks like here in a moment. The first piece of the new complexity with COVID is determining where your obligations are. A lot of this stems from the Wayfair decision, the U.S. Supreme Court ruling in South Dakota versus Wayfair. This created those economic nexus threshold requirements that by the end of this year will be evident in 45 of the 46 states that have sales tax regulations on the books. The only state that won't is Missouri. The other holdout was Florida, but they recently passed some legislation where that's going to be live by the end of 2021. So it creates new obligations for the businesses to, at a minimum, register in states where they didn't previously. So this is a visual representation of that. June of 2018, when that first ruling came out, these states in blue had economic nexus regulations pushed out immediately. This is how the landscape has changed. These are all the states that have sales tax regulations on the books currently, and then Missouri will be the only holdout for those thresholds. So not only are economic thresholds new, but in terms of what those obligations are, those states have also changed them to capture more sales in the last probably 14 months. So think late 2019, early 2020, most states moved to change their already brand new existing economic threshold laws to capture exempt sales. So previously they were looking at roughly $200,000 in taxable revenue. Most states have lowered that threshold to about $100,000 annually in gross receipts to require highly exempt businesses to, at a minimum, register with that state, which then turns on the ability for that state to come and audit those businesses. So risk goes up, complexity from a compliance standpoint has gone up, but our goal is to step in here and make this growth of your obligations a non-issue. All right, for these highly exempt businesses not historically collecting, now we talked about the calculation workflow briefly. For businesses that are, say, 80+% exempt, what our calculation service is going to do for you is provide you an audit trail that dovetails directly with your exemption certificate management process. So on the front end with the calculation, we're showing how much tax should be collected if this is a taxable transaction. So that last piece is where you come over the top with our cert capture platform and shows, yes, for this customer, we have a current valid exemption certificate for the exemption that customer is claiming. Therefore, auditor, this is why sales tax was not collected and then remitted to your jurisdiction on this transaction. So you're likely not going to be collecting much of any sales tax. You're not going to be remitting much. You'll still be required to file what are called $0 returns. I'm sure most of you are familiar with that already. So we don't need to go down that rabbit hole too much. But what we're doing on the calculation standpoint for most manufacturers is giving them the peace of mind that we've captured the correct rate and then proving why sales tax was not collected through the efficient maintenance and collection of your exempt customer exemptions. So challenges that we've historically seen with management of exemptions: difficult to collect if you have a high volume of customers, which again is up to you for that determination, whether that could be a couple hundred, couple thousand. That pain of going to each customer at varying frequencies, because again, Florida could be annual, California may not require renewal ever. Other states are 2 to 3 years. Staying on top of all of that is a pain. And that's just related to collection. The next piece of pain is, are you collecting the right form? Is it filled out correctly? Are there any missing pieces? For example, did your customer forget to sign, which would then invalidate the form that you have in hand? All of this is really time consuming and requires additional headcount if you're not going to pursue automation here. So this all goes to show that a lot of time and effort is spent on something that's kind of difficult to manage and stay on top of state by state, year by year, and the risk associated with it is significant. For highly exempt businesses, if you don't have a valid exemption certificate on file, you could be on the hook for that uncollected tax going back to when you triggered Nexus, for example. which would be, sometimes we've seen could be in the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, in addition to interest and penalties associated with that uncollected tax. So it's an easy problem to fix, especially when you consider the amount of risk associated with it. This slide just goes to show the complexity and frankly why we drop a pin on a map to capture every rate. This is just one zip code in Colorado where you can see we've got 5 different rates associated or different jurisdictions here. But you have to make sure that you're capturing all of this, and then our workflow shows and documents on a line item basis which rates apply to which transaction. So if you're shipping on one invoice to multiple locations, you would see that breakdown as well. We stand by that accuracy guarantee for a reason. We know we're capturing the correct rates. We're looking and doing the correct tax research and taxability determinations on your behalf each and every time. So you can have that peace of mind that even if you're not collecting tax, that we're providing you that rock solid audit trail. Goes to show the complexity with product taxability. We talk about donuts in Texas. If you're buying less than 5, that's a taxable transaction. If you're buying 6 or more, that's an exempt transaction. Tree trimming in California with lights is non-taxable, is taxable. Labor only is exempt. There's a lot of different pieces on individual invoices and line items that your tax teams would be spending a lot of time doing research, because these departments of revenue can change those rules at any point. Our team of about 100 folks in our Seattle headquarters stays on top of those changes across the 12,000 plus jurisdictions and pushes updates through our cloud-based engine monthly. So it's a real-time update. There's no intervention from your folks at any point. We run in the background, handle all this work, whether it's rate determination, taxability determination, as well as looking at who's making those purchases each and every time, and you don't have to basically touch it anymore. All right. It's just kind of highlights everything that we've talked about, looking at the requirements and obligations, so knowing where you must collect and remit. We can do the registrations for you in-house as part of an agreement. So typically customers leverage our calculation service through pre-built integrations for, say, Microsoft systems. We're able to then track your sales on a state-by-state basis and show you where your current sales put you against current up-to-date economic threshold requirements, and kind of prompt you with a heat map. It would look similar to this, but states would be 1 of 3 colors: gray if you're either already registered or nowhere near the requirement, yellow if you're 80% of the threshold, and orange if you've triggered a requirement. And you can register right through your dashboard for all those states. So at a high level, if you think of what Avalara is doing, the interface with the end user is you're telling us simply where you have Nexus, so turning on those states and even local jurisdictions, and how frequently they want you to file. We can handle the state level reporting, we can handle the local jurisdiction reporting for those troublesome states like Louisiana with the different parishes, Colorado with all their local jurisdictions. We can handle all that. You just need to tell us where and how frequently. And then we'll track and manage the exempt sales for you, and then remit, or at a minimum file those $0 returns for you. It's truly an end-to-end seamless solution. So we've talked exclusively so far about sales tax. I want to just briefly touch on consumer use. This is a new capability as of January 1 of 2020. Very few other vendors have even touched this. It's been historically very difficult to automate, but we've launched the most robust tool in the industry to help you kind of round out your sales and use tax processes. It's called Avalara for Consumer Use. This will help you look at things like, just take Avalara for example, headquartered in Seattle, but we've got employees now, even pre-COVID, working remotely all over the country. So for things like laptop purchases, what that rate is for purchases out of our Seattle headquarters for then dissemination to North Carolina, California, Idaho, how that product is being used in that location can create some discrepancies. and then a requirement to report use tax as well. So our solution can handle both the sales tax piece on the front end as well as the ongoing consumer use requirement, whether that's allocating purchases across multiple cost centers, like if you've got multiple factories, the associated purchases for all those factories, anything related to purchases for your business, we have a solution to help you for that accurate calculation. And then since most states filings are a sales and use tax filing, we can handle that other use tax piece in addition to the sales tax reporting. So we aim to be the one-stop shop for you there. All right, Angie. Actually, this isn't one of the poll questions. My apologies. So what does tax compliance automation look like in this new landscape with COVID? Let's start with the document management, since that's probably the biggest risk for everybody on the call today. Historically, businesses have been managing their exemptions typically at new customer onboarding, either getting a paper copy of the exemption or getting a PDF and storing it in a filing cabinet of some sort. It's difficult to manage, especially with those state-specific requirements. For renewals, it makes audit defense and preparation very time-consuming as well, since you have to go digging through a filing cabinet. We're looking to get you from paper or PDF into truly digital. So the amount of time it takes to prepare for and defend an audit from an exemption standpoint is the amount of time it takes to export an Excel file. So that would all interface directly with our calculation engine, like we've talked about with that workflow, for accurate calculation and reporting. It's really that true core offering, and our platform called CertCapture is the industry standard. We'll dive into more of what this looks like, especially from a customer experience. So our platform allows for easy, quick, efficient collection and validation. So what that actually means is, I'm sure you're all familiar with email campaigns, or at least your marketing folks would be. We can look at, on a state-by-state basis, your exempt customers and then run campaigns in mass. We provide you a template which you modify, put your company letterhead on it, you modify the messaging for what you want your customers to see, and then we provide a link in there which directs them back to the CertCapture website, where in 3 to 5 minutes they can populate the form for exactly what you need. As soon as they click save, it's stored on the engine for you to manage then moving forward. Once they hit save, this is really the primary interface with your employees. Someone would need to do a quick validation, i.e., do you have the signature? Were there any missing fields? So we're dramatically cutting down on the workload associated with collection and validation of what you're required to have to not collect. That would then immediately work with the calculation engine. That's a check every single time there's a purchase. And then as far as the email campaigns go, we've touched on someone who's provided at the initial email a full, complete certificate for you, but we also know that's not realistic. Sometimes that can take multiple rounds of outreach, but our tool will show you who's opened the document, who's a third of the way through, who hasn't touched it yet, so you can continue to refine who you're reaching out to. So it leads to a much happier customer experience. They're not having to spend a ton of time going to, say, that Colorado or California Department of Revenue website to make sure they have the right form. It gives them everything they need, where they can fill out the appropriate exemption certificate in literally 3 to 5 minutes. So it's a much better customer experience. It's also a better fit for your compliance needs. And then it dovetails directly with our calculation engine, like we've been talking about. Tax is calculated correctly the first time. So this is the end-to-end, end-to-end workflow. I'm not sure why I started capturing. There we go. There we go, folks. So from an order to cash standpoint, a new customer wants to purchase something for you. That order comes in, whether it's through your e-commerce site, that order is directly entered into your ERP, whatever the case may be. We're calculating tax on that. Then we're checking at who's purchasing it. This is the exemption piece we've been talking about. So do you have a valid exemption on file? If you don't, you can request it immediately, and that customer can fill it out. So when that invoice is committed, it does not have tax collected. If you choose to outsource your filings to us, this 0.4 of a second right here, guaranteed accurate calculation, that's stored on our cloud engine called AuditTax, and then immediately shared with our returns engine for reporting purposes. So it's a seamless solution, easy to navigate. We can dive into that if there are questions at the end, but that's a high-level overview of that transition from paper to digital calculation, collection, and reporting. All right, so poll question here, Angie. What do you want to happen next?
If all of you could make your selection, and then we can get this poll tallied. All right, thank you. 100% said, I'm here just to learn.
Great. No problem. So some additional things that I wanted to touch on as far as the customer experience goes is we already have the industry standard for exemption certificate management. We've created additional COVID related improvements to that. So for highly exempt businesses launching an e-commerce site for their B2B customers to purchase, we now have the ability for you to collect exemption certificates immediately through the shopping cart using our Cert Capture API for e-commerce. Additionally, for your website, if some of you have either a dealer portal or a wholesaler portal, you can create a My Account feature where for those recurring exempt customers, they can actually see which exemptions they've provided to you, which ones are still current, which ones are nearing expiration or have already expired, and they can immediately give you and renew those certificates without you having to go out proactively. So it pushes more work and onus onto your buyers to provide you everything that you're required from a compliance standpoint. We've gotten rave reviews on that, frankly. A lot of folks have leveraged that in the last 8 months who I've recently onboarded. Cuts down on the workload. It creates a tighter relationship with their buyers because that allows them to actually see, hey, if I don't provide this Florida exemption certificate, I know I'm going to be charged Florida sales tax. I don't want to do that. Let me stay ahead of it, keep this train rolling without slowing down the checkout process. Additionally, for growth of Nexus obligations into additional states and likely an uptick in the required number of certificates you are required to manage, we have a team of exemption certificate experts in our Durham, North Carolina headquarters where they can go out on your behalf and in roughly 60 to 90 days collect whatever volume of certificates you need to update or are missing. So that could be 10, it could be 10,000. Their whole goal is to go out, collect, validate, and store every exemption certificate you're required to have on file or you want us to manage. And then at the end of that 60 to 90 day window, give you back a fully compliant platform with all of the exemptions you are required to have. So then you're just doing the ongoing management. We can also do the ongoing management for you, but that's typically what we've seen with COVID as well as the Wayfair changes. So we've got a lot of resources here on this slide, which Karen and I can provide after the call. We've got a COVID-19 resource hub. So any regulatory changes from a COVID standpoint, we have available in one spot for you. We've got a fantastic Nexus website that breaks down state by state, Nexus trigger by Nexus trigger. So today we've been talking mostly about economic and physical presence. There's affiliate Nexus, all kinds of other Nexus triggers. All of that is broken down with the latest and greatest state by state information. We also have a fantastic blog. I know I've been saying fantastic a lot, but our team in marketing as well as our compliance staff does a great job of pushing out industry insights, new regulatory changes, and really what those impacts mean for the end users through our blogs and our Avalara Commerce Monitor. And finally, if you are interested in learning more about how sales tax automation and exemption certificate management could be a good fit, or just see if it's something that you want to pursue, you always have access through your Innovia partner to Karen and myself. So happy to jump on a call and break down what your obligations are on a business by business, state by state basis, and then see if sales tax automation through Avalara is a good fit for you. So let me stop there for any questions.
Thank you, Larry. Yes, we do have some questions that came through. If anybody has any additional ones, please feel free to type those in and we can get those addressed. The first one that came through is, should I just have a database for certificates I can reference, or should I link them to each transaction?
It's a good question. That should be linked to every transaction, because part of an accurate calculation is not only the rates and the taxability of the product, but it's who is buying it. And the only way to make that determination each and every purchase is by checking the exemption certificate for that specific customer for that state. So having a solution that does that automatically for you and marries up directly with your accounting system or your e-commerce platform or even your in-person point of sale is really critical.
Okay, thank you. And the next question is, this one's a little bit long. There are some states that include an expiration date on their certificates. Do we need to make sure that we have not expired certificates from customers for those states, or is it okay if we get a new one every few years?
Yeah, great question. So the first piece is you want to be staying on top of those state-specific expirations. There are states that do not require any renewal beyond the initial collection, but we default to best practice, as in those cases, at a minimum, update them every couple years. So it's kind of both. You want to make sure that the customer information is still accurate for those ones that don't expire. You know, were they acquired? Have they changed address? It's a lot to stay on top of, and our solution is designed to be proactive while also decreasing the amount of time that you're spending on this piece. So it's one of those high risk, but doesn't add a ton of value in terms of revenue generation. So we want to take that risk and time burden off your plate. So through running efficient campaigns to collect everything quickly and efficiently, and then also staying on top of all your obligations.
Okay, great. Thank you. And the last question that we have is, what if each location is under a different business or franchise? Should I get different exempt forms?
Ooh, good question. So let me see if I understand the question correctly. So let's take, for example, sales to a big distributor or a big retailer that has multiple locations. You would want to collect exemption certificate for each location where that product that's going to the end user is being sold. Classic example is if you're selling to like Bass Pro Shops. If you have Nexus in those different states, you'd want to make sure that you have an exemption certificate, not just for that customer's home, or sorry, headquarters. It would be every location by state, I should clarify.
Okay, great. Well, Larry, I believe those are the only questions that we had for you today. If anybody has any additional questions, please feel free to contact your account manager here at Inovia Consulting, or Larry has his information up on the screen. You can contact him as well, and anybody would be happy to address those concerns for you. So I just want to take this time to thank everybody for being on our webinar, or if you're watching on demand, thank you for taking the time out to watch this. And thank you, Larry and Karen, for presenting today. Really appreciate it.
Our pleasure. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Angie. Thanks, everyone.
All right, thank you again. We do have a round of training workshops that I wanted to let you know about. You can visit our training workshop page, and that's inovia.com/workshops for more information and to register for the training workshop that fits your role. And we do have more webinars coming up. This Thursday afternoon, we have our very own Lisa Doran presenting on your guide to customizing profiles in the Business Central web client. So check out our website for more of our upcoming events, and that's inovia.com/events. And we do have a podcast going on. If you have not heard of it by now, it's called the Inovia Conversation. And we just want to encourage you to listen to our selection that our hosts, Steve Waltz and Jeff Pergolski, have provided to us. You can learn more about the different podcast platforms on our podcast page, and that's inovia.com/podcast. So check out those selections and subscribe so you'll get notified when those new episodes air. All right, well, we thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Thank you again, Karen and Larry, for presenting, and we look forward to seeing you soon on another Inovia webinar. Have a good holiday, everyone. Take care.